Chapter 2 Saving Sage, Part 2 on How to Recognize a Vaccine Reaction. Darla Johnson was annoyed at the wait. Not only did she have to sit in the busy waiting room for a half hour, she then had to wait for the pediatrician in the exam room for another 20 minutes. She heard a knock on the door and in walked Dr. Jones. "Hello, Mrs. Johnson. Let's see how Sage is doing." Darla watched the doctor do a quick exam and consult the electronic chart on his laptop. "Looks like Sage is doing well, about average size on the growth chart compared to other 4-month-olds. Is she rolling over front to back and back to front?" "Almost," answered Darla. "I see her trying every day." "Okay, so today's vaccines are a repeat of the last visit: DTaP, Hib, pneumococcal, rotavirus, polio, and hepatitis B. Dr. Jones, do you think she'll scream all night again like she did last time? That was pretty rough." "What's that now?" The doctor looked confused. "At 2 months, the night we got the first vaccines, she ended up in the ER because she was so fussy. They told me it was a normal reaction, gave her Tylenol, and later she was fine." Darla was surprised he didn't know. Didn't they call him? Didn't the ER send records so he would know? She assumed they would have. "Okay, start from the beginning. Tell me what happened." The doctor glanced at his watch as he said this. Darla explained quickly how Sage started screaming within minutes of the shot on their drive home, screamed nonstop all afternoon and evening, and what had happened at the ER. "How soon were things back to normal?" he asked. "Well, she was fine about an hour after they gave her Tylenol. Then she slept for like 3 days and barely took her bottle." "That was a nice break, actually. I got more rest in those days than I have in the past 4 months." "Yeah, that sounds pretty typical. Babies often react that way to their shots. It's nothing to worry about," Dr. Jones reassured her as he stood up. "Okay." Darla was a little doubtful, but the doctor would know, she told herself. Darla waited another 15 minutes for the nurse to bring in baby Sage's shots. "God, I hope she doesn't scream all night again," she thought. "That was awful, and I don't want to spend another night in the ER. And they didn't even have to do anything. Geez, I could have squirted that Tylenol into her mouth better than the nurse did." Darla was glad Sage became such an easy baby after that. For the first 2 months of her life, she seemed hungry all the time and wanted to be held a lot. She'd been a lot of work, always wanting something. But ever since that night of screaming at 2 months, she'd changed for the better. The ER doctor told her the screaming was just an expected reaction to the vaccines and that she'd be fine in a few days. And he was right, she smiled. More than right. Sage has been a piece of cake ever since. Could the screaming actually have changed something? Well, Dr. Jones isn't concerned. Her reverie was interrupted by a knock on the door, and in swept the nurse with a tray full of syringes. Nurse Jamie Anderson preferred doing the shots for Dr. Tomaso's patients. She liked only having to give 1 or 2 shots at a time, but she was stuck with Dr. Jones today and sighed as she carried the tray into the exam room. "Hello, Mrs. Johnson, and how's little Sage doing today?" "Great. The doctor says she's doing just fine, meeting all her milestones, growing well. I sure hope she doesn't scream all night from these shots again. This time I already gave her Tylenol before we came in." "Great idea," Jamie agreed. She knew that some crying was expected. She also knew that nonstop, inconsolable screaming for 3 or more hours was not expected. In fact, it meant a baby was having an encephalitis reaction, or brain swelling and inflammation. Well, Dr. Jones ordered the shots, so he must have figured the patient's first reaction wasn't bad enough to worry about. Plus, moms always exaggerate. And if the baby had an encephalitis reaction or screaming all night like mom said, she'd probably have gone to the ER, and they would have told her not to repeat the vaccines. I don't want to worry her more by asking her about it. "I'm sure she'll be just fine." Ambulance coming in, announced Lisa. Wake up, sleepy. Jack lifted his head up off the desk. I'm awake. It was a quiet night in the ER. Jack preferred busy. It made the night pass more quickly. What is it? He asked, jogging to catch up with the nurse. Little baby having a seizure is all I know. Jack saw the ambulance bay double doors open at the end of the hallway to admit two paramedics wheeling a stretcher, followed by a woman whom he assumed was the mother. She looks familiar. He followed the stretcher into the trauma area and took a look at the apparently sleeping baby. Good color, steady breathing. Jack let out a sigh of relief and looked up at one of the paramedics. 4-month-old female had an apparent febrile seizure. We estimate it lasted about 3 minutes. Was post-ictal but stable when we got there. Rectal temp was 104.7. We provided cooling measures on the ride over. Vitals have otherwise been stable. Jack leaned in for a closer survey of the baby, listening and feeling around to confirm she was okay for now. Muscle tones a bit low, but steady heart rate and breathing, pupils reactive, and arousable, he confirmed as the baby started to squirm in response to Jack's prodding. Jack stood up and looked around for the mother. This is Mrs. Johnson, offered the paramedic, guiding the woman forward. Is she okay? Asked the familiar face. Johnson, Jack remembered. About 2 months ago, the screaming baby who was fine. Hello again, Mrs. Johnson. I'm Dr. Stanley. I saw you and your baby a couple of months ago. Yeah, she looks fine now. We'll give her more Tylenol to bring the fever down, then decide what more we may need to do. But first, start from the beginning and tell me everything that happened. We just had our checkup today, like the last time we came here. But this time she didn't scream or cry all day. She did the opposite. She just slept. Didn't even wake up for her dream feed bottle at 11. Then around 2 a.m. I heard something on the video monitor, but I couldn't really see her very well. So I went into the room and she was shaking from head to toe. I picked her up and she was on fire. My husband called 911. It took forever for them to get to us. The baby stopped shaking at some point and has just been sleeping until now. Sounds like an uncomplicated febrile seizure. I know it's very scary when it happens, but ultimately these things are pretty harmless. Let me do a full exam and we'll decide if we need to do anything. Jack was glad for something interesting to do. It sure beat having Lisa catching him napping again. Oh my God, vented Darla, sitting in the front passenger seat as her husband drove them back home a few hours later. Why does this keep happening? Arthur Johnson was a calm person. Nothing rattled him. Being a father of now 4 kids, he learned to let the little things go, and the doc had reassured them that this, indeed, was no big deal. Honey, the doc said it's fine. These fever, seizure things happen all the time, and they're harmless, right? Sage is fine now. Just look at her sleeping back there in her car seat. The fever's gone. Just relax. But why did she get such a high fever? Almost 105. She's never had a fever like that, not even when she had that cold and cough last month. I bet it's those damn shots, that's what it is. Dr. Jones said she might get a fever, but he never said something like this could happen. Yeah, but the ER doc said the vaccines aren't really technically what caused the seizure, remember? He said it was the fever. And he said the fever might not even be from the vaccines. The baby probably has a virus, too. What do you call it? Rosalia or something? Roseola, corrected Darla, rolling her eyes. Geez, I'm the medical one in this family. She already pulled up febrile seizures and roseola on her phone while still at the ER after the doctor explained it all. But febrile seizures usually don't start until 6 months, and neither does roseola. And what? It's more likely our baby just happened to get sick tonight than it is that the vaccines caused the seizure? What if the doctor is wrong? He was right the last time you rushed in just because she was crying. He knew it was a mistake as the last few words left his mouth and cringed. Are you effing kidding me, Artie? Just because she was crying? She was screaming nonstop all day and half the night. That's not normal. and neither was this seizure. Darla didn't feel nearly as smart as she used to. She'd come to accept that fact after her second child. Motherhood seemed to have sucked some of the IQ right out of her, but she was determined to get to the bottom of this, because this involved her baby. She knew her inner genius wouldn't fail her now. It had been a week since the seizure, and Sage still wasn't the same. She'd stopped smiling, the sparkle in her eye was gone, and what little eye contact she did manage was fleeting. On the other hand, she was still a great sleeper and was more calm and quiet than ever. Arthur tried to reassure her that the baby was fine, but Darla knew better, and she had the pictures to prove it. Pictures from before 2 months, from before that first ER visit, from before those first vaccines. She scrolled through her camera roll on the phone, reminiscing. The look on Sage's face in the pictures after 2 months was just dull. Then, after 3 months, the sparkle returned, and Darla lingered on the series of smiles and shiny eyes from just a few weeks ago. And now, Darla shook herself. No more crying. I have work to do. She opened up Google on her laptop and typed in vaccines. She saw that a link to the Centers for Disease Control and Prevention was the first to pop up. I know them, the CDC. They know all about vaccines. She saw several articles that reassured her vaccines are safe, vaccines are effective, and that vaccines save lives. I've seen that a lot on the news. So that's where those statements come from, the CDC. But that's not what happened to Sage. They didn't seem to save my child. In fact, they didn't save her life, they threatened it. Darla searched again, but this time vaccine side effects. The first link, again, was from the Centers for Disease Control. Well, they are in charge of vaccines, I think. Let's see what they say about side effects. She touched the link and a page opened up that read, Possible Side Effects from Vaccines, and seemed to list every vaccine. She browsed through some of the vaccines that she was familiar with and was surprised to see the words, A vaccine, like any medicine, is capable of causing serious problems. She went to hepatitis A vaccine. I think that was one they gave Sage, right? As with any medicine, there is a very remote chance of a vaccine causing a serious injury or death. And hepatitis B. Serious reactions are also possible. MMR is capable of causing serious problems. The risk of MMR vaccine causing serious harm or death is extremely small. Small? How small? What do they consider extremely small? Is their definition of a small risk the same as mine? Then more on the MMR. Includes severe allergic reactions and problems such as deafness, long-term seizures, coma, lowered consciousness, and permanent brain damage. What the F? Even chickenpox vaccine. Other serious problems including severe brain reactions and low platelet count. Wait, how can they say vaccines are safe, vaccines save lives, and then have all this small print that warns about brain damage and death? So what exactly do they mean by safe? And I don't even know what vaccines she had. Geez, what's wrong with me? I let them give my baby a few shots and didn't even know what they were giving her. Just like I did with our first 3 kids. Oh yeah, the vaccine card. She reached for her purse hanging on the chair next to her at the dining room table. There was the folded yellow card wrapped in a plastic sheath. She pulled it out and opened it up. On it, she saw a series of vaccines with dates handwritten in, along with Valley View Pediatrics stamped next to each. The dates corresponded to Sage being 2 months and 4 months old. There was even a date from the day she was born, written in next to hepatitis B vaccine. That's weird, she thought. I don't remember her getting a vaccine when she was born, and I certainly don't remember anyone asking me if I wanted her to have a vaccine. Not even during the few days she spent in the NICU because of that fever on the second day. Wait, isn't hepatitis B an STD? What the hell? I don't have Hep B. Why would they give her that? Could Artie have Hep B? Could the doctor at the hospital have ordered that vaccine because Artie has it? No. If Artie had hepatitis B, I would know it. So why? She chided herself to stay focused. Vaccine side effects. She saw a Hib vaccine listed on the yellow card, then clicked on Hib on the website and saw the list of side effects. Redness, swelling, fever, nothing that seemed like any big deal. She went back and tapped on another vaccine, PCV13. What is that? Never heard of it. She knew she'd have to go back and read more about the actual diseases. This shot had a slightly longer list of side effects. About half become drowsy and have a temporary loss of appetite, she read. No crap. She wondered why no one warned her to expect that if it was going to happen to half of babies. Swelling, fever, 1 in 20 will have fever over 102. Then 8 out of 10 become fussy or irritable. It's as if Sage read these side effects and decided to have them all. No wonder the ER doctor said at the first ER trip that this was all normal and expected. But why on earth didn't Dr. Jones even tell me? If half are going to stop eating and most are going to get fussy, why not tell me to expect that? Would have saved me that first trip to the ER. Darla scanned through the rest of that page, not noticing anything pertinent until one word caught her eye: seizure. Young children who get the PCV13 vaccine at the same time as a flu shot may be at increased risk for seizures caused by fever. She grabbed the card to see if Sage had also gotten a flu shot that day, but no, the flu shot section of the card was blank. I gotta remember not to get a flu shot with this PCV13 vaccine. But I'm sure Dr. Jones knows that, doesn't he? She wrote the word seizure next to the flu shot and PCV sections of the card so she wouldn't forget. But why did Sage have a seizure with these shots? She moved on to rotavirus vaccine, not knowing what that disease was either. There was the same warning about irritability, but then intussusception? She had to read the explanation a few times and realized that Sage had not had any signs of intestinal blockage, but there is a small risk of whatever from the rotavirus vaccine may occur in 1 in 20,000 babies who get the vaccine. I wonder how many babies that happens to every year. Wait, I can figure that out. I know we have about 4 million babies born every year in the U.S. How would I do that math? Divide 4 million by 20,000? Darla pulled out her phone and swiped open the calculator. 200. Wow. 200 babies maybe needing intestinal surgery to relieve a blockage every year from a vaccine? But Darla was no longer feeling surprised by any of this. What she was feeling was anger. Anger that she hadn't even once been informed about any of these risks. And I gave all these shots to my first 3 kids as well, and didn't even know a single thing about any of them. Stop that, Darla. You're not going to guilt yourself over this. It's not your fault. The doctor is supposed to warn you about all this, isn't he? Or the nurse? Darla knew she wouldn't be able to avoid the guilt forever, but it was anger that was her fuel now. She kept reading to the end of rotavirus and was re-surprised all over again. There is a remote chance of a vaccine causing a serious injury or death. Remote again. How remote? If there is even a chance of that, why would anyone? People just don't know. They have no idea. I certainly didn't. Has Sage suffered a serious injury? Did she fall victim to this remote chance? And why didn't the other vaccine pages give the same warning? She scrolled back to the previous vaccines and was shocked to see that all the other ones also had this same exact warning, and she hadn't even noticed. And she saw something else. This information is based on the rotavirus VIS. What's a VIS? She tapped on it and continued to read. And Darla Johnson hadn't yet even begun to unravel what exactly did happen to her baby. But she would, though, 2 vaccines later, right there in black and white on the CDC vaccine information statement for the DTaP vaccine. A sheet she was supposed to have been given to read twice so far at the pediatrician's office and wasn't. Darla was about to learn another new word, encephalitis, and she wasn't going to like it. Arthur Johnson hit the snooze button on the alarm clock. He wasn't sure if this was the first or second snooze, and was just about to not care and go back to sleep when he realized he was alone in the bed. Darla usually sleeps later than I do. Maybe the baby woke her up early. He rolled out of bed and grabbed his bathrobe, knowing that if the baby was up, he'd better get up too. The rest of the kids should still be asleep on this Saturday morning. As he walked down the hallway, he saw the baby's bedroom door was still closed. Shrugging, he continued toward the kitchen. He noticed the absence of the bacon and pancakes aroma that used to waft through the house on Saturday mornings a long time ago. Nowadays, weekend breakfast had become his job, not that he minded. Arthur noticed his wife sitting at the kitchen table, her head resting on her arms, her computer open, her purse lying on its side with its contents half strewn about, and a half-empty cup of coffee within reach. She was asleep, as evidenced by the little puddle of drool on the table near her open mouth. He watched her for several long seconds, saw her shoulders rise and fall with each breath, and sighed happily. He tiptoed up and kissed her on the forehead. Then again, longer. He felt her stir slightly, stretch. Then he had to jump back as she sat up quickly and looked around. "Good morning, sleepyhead," he greeted her and leaned in for a hug. "You know, I think all the kids are still asleep. The baby, too. And—" "Artie, you're not going to believe what I found last night," Darla exclaimed, surprisingly awake and completely oblivious to her husband's too subtle hint, or simply too focused on whatever last night's mission had been to think about anything else. Sit down. Let me show you," his wife continued. "Wait, you better have some coffee first." Darla jumped up and strode over to the coffee pot, still half full and warm. "You are right, honey. It is a good thing all the kids are still asleep because I need your undivided attention." "You were going to have it," he sighed. "All kinds of undivided attention." "Okay, princess, what is it?" he asked as he took the warm mug of coffee and sat down at the table. Darla sat down next to him and pulled up the CDC website. "Here is what is called a vaccine information statement. It's from the Centers for Disease Control, and it's a 2-page summary of the pros and cons of each vaccine. It explains the risk of the disease, then the side effects of the vaccine, and any warnings you should be aware of regarding that vaccine." "Why would there be any warnings? These things are perfectly safe and effective. You hear that all the time on the news." "Good question. They say they are safe and effective out of one side of their mouths, then quietly provide dozens of pages of warnings and side effects. It's like the TV commercials. The guy that talks so fast and quietly about all the warnings of death if you take this drug, and to ask your doctor if this purple pill is right for you. And our doctor didn't tell us anything," said Darla angrily. "Sorry, I've been processing this all night, and you're just hearing it for the first time. Okay, so here is the VIS for what is called the DTaP vaccine." "The VIS for what vaccine?" "The vaccine information statement. Come on, Artie, keep up. For the diphtheria, tetanus, and pertussis vaccine. This is the VIS version the CDC used since 2007 up through this year. They just updated it last week, so some of this is different on the CDC website now. But read this section titled, 'Some Children Should Not Get DTaP Vaccine or Should Wait.'" Arthur read on. "Don't vaccinate if your baby is really sick. Duh. Don't vaccinate if there's been a life-threatening allergic reaction to a previous dose. Duh again. If a child suffered a brain disease within 7 days of the vaccine. Seriously? These are also obvious reasons why someone would not get the vaccine again. Why even bother having this as a warning? Keep reading, Arthur, Darla said patiently. Talk to your doctor if your child 1. Had a seizure or collapsed after a dose of DTAP, 2. Cried nonstop for 3 or more hours after a dose of DTAP, or 3. Had a fever over 105 degrees after a dose of DTAP. Okay, wait, Sage had a seizure. So what does it mean, talk with your doctor if your child had a seizure? Keep reading below that. Some of these children should not get another dose of pertussis vaccine. So, sounds like we shouldn't do another dose of this vaccine then. Arthur, I want you to reason through this yourself and see if you can reach the same conclusion I did. Sage got this vaccine twice, once at 2 months and once at 4 months. Think about what happened each time and read the warnings again. Arthur did as instructed, reading through the list of, wait, nonstop crying for 3 or more hours? Sage did that after the first dose. Some of these children should not get another dose. Ask your doctor for more information. When you went in for Sage's 4-month appointment, did you ask Dr. Jones about this? Did you tell him about Sage's hours of screaming and your trip to the ER? Yes, managed Darla through the start of her tears. I told him all about it. He said it was a normal reaction. But the CDC says right here some children are not supposed to get the vaccine again if that happens. Which children? How would we know? Wouldn't Dr. Jones know? Maybe he thought it through and decided Sage is not in that group of children who shouldn't get another dose. No, I don't think it's that at all, Artie, said Darla quietly. I think it's that Dr. Jones doesn't even know about these warnings. I don't think he even knows what nonstop crying for 3 or more hours actually indicates, because I did tell him exactly what Sage did. I think he is completely in the dark about these vaccine side effects and warnings. Didn't he learn this stuff in medical school? Obviously not. There's a federal law that mandates Dr. Jones was supposed to give us these forms to read. He didn't. And then he ignored the very warnings from the CDC about the danger of repeating this vaccine in babies who have had such reactions. Even the vaccine package insert on the FDA website gives the same warnings. But that's not the only problem. The VIS that I just had you read was an older version. The CDC just changed it last week. And they removed the warning about not repeating the vaccine if your child suffered 3 or more hours of nonstop screaming or fever over 105. They left in the warnings about seizures, but took out the nonstop crying and high fever, as if they don't want parents to know those are serious problems. If he broke federal law, can't we report him or something? Absolutely. I am going to report him to the medical board for this. But technically, he isn't required to follow this federal law because most states, including ours, have a law that says doctors are not required to give informed consent for vaccines, specifically just for vaccines. Like, they have to give informed consent for every other medical treatment they provide, but not vaccines. So the state law gets them off the hook from the federal law. Even if I report him, I doubt anything will happen. But if enough parents report him for this, he'd get the message, right? Maybe start paying more attention to vaccine reactions? Good point. And what about all the rest of the reactions listed on the sheet below that? Continued Arthur, not really asking a question. There are mild problems that seem to occur in about 1 in 4 kids. Fever, redness, swelling. That's probably what you would call normal. Tired, poor appetite in 1 in 10 kids. And Sage. Wait, seizures are only 1 in 14,000? For this vaccine, yes, but for another vaccine, MMR chickenpox, has a seizure risk of 1 in 1250, according to the old VIS. The new VIS, changed 6 months ago, doesn't have this statistic. Did Sage have those shots too? No, those aren't until 12 months, but there's no way I'm letting her have those. Not with a seizure risk like that. And the seizure reaction that was supposed to be only 1 in 14,000 just so happened to hit Sage. But what's so bad with this nonstop crying for 3 hours reaction that she had with the first shots anyway? The CDC VIS form categorizes it as a moderate reaction, but just as serious as seizures, explained Darla, pointing to the screen. That's because nonstop, inconsolable crying for 3 or more hours is a symptom of vaccine induced encephalitis. Encephalitis? Arthur looked confused. That has something to do with the brain. Yes, it means brain swelling and inflammation, continued Darla. It wasn't easy to figure that out. It took me about an hour of reading various medical websites. That's because there are many different infectious causes of encephalitis, like viruses and parasites. Those cases are much more severe and require hospitalization and advanced medical treatment. But vaccine-induced encephalitis is usually milder, so it's rarely recognized. But it's still brain swelling and inflammation, no matter how you look at it. And it's not okay, in my opinion. I even found a recent article in a medical journal called Pediatrics, July 2018. It's right here. She clicked on the browser tab. Safer pertussis vaccines for children, trading efficacy for safety. This article describes how the old DTP vaccine caused 4 particularly harmful reactions: high fever over 105, febrile seizures, prolonged crying, and acute encephalopathy. It was so bad they had to stop using the vaccine and swap it out for the newer DTAP. The newer one doesn't work as well, but it's less likely to cause these severe reactions. But even the DTAP vaccine can trigger these, and that's what happened to Sage. Fever, nonstop inconsolable crying for hours, and febrile seizure. I'll show you a website that has a short video on how to recognize vaccine reactions like this later, too, from Immunity Education Group or something like that. So why doesn't it just say encephalitis or brain swelling and inflammation on the CDC website so people would know? Darla just waited. They don't want people to know. They can't say brain swelling or brain anything occurs because no one would get the vaccine. And then Sage had an even worse reaction because we repeated the shot. The very reaction that it warns about right here, a seizure, finished Arthur. Exactly, smiled Darla through the tears, relieved that her husband saw the same thing she did. She watched her husband continue to read and knew what part he was coming to. This encephalitis is 1 in 1,000, he nearly shouted. If I had known they were going to give my baby a shot that had a 1 in 1,000 chance of making her brain swell, I sure as hell wouldn't have let them do it. And I see they've totally removed that number from the new VIS on the CDC website. They want people to think it's extremely rare. And no wonder they only publicly call it nonstop crying for 3 hours. That way they can get away with it seeming harmless, and they don't scare people away from the vaccine. But they are lying, and screaming and seizures are supposed to be warnings not to repeat the vaccine again. Arthur stood up and started pacing. So Dr. Jones not only broke the law, he put our child in danger. Thank God the seizure was brief, and she hasn't had another one. Thank God Sage is okay. Darla's tears started flowing more freely now, because this next part would be even more difficult. She didn't want to break her husband's heart or make him any angrier than he already was, but she also needed his support in this. She needed him to be on her side and not just try to tell her everything was fine. They needed to get through this together. Darla pointed to the severe reactions list on the VIS form, and her husband read out loud as he followed her finger. 1. Long-term seizures, coma, or lower consciousness, and 2. Permanent brain damage. These are so rare it is hard to tell if they are caused by the vaccine. Arthur, the tears were streaming freely down her face now. I don't think Sage is okay. Resources for this part are available at johnphilipryan.com.